Okay, someone I'm very excited to speak to. It is Bridget Phetasy, absolute Twitter star, host of also the podcast Walk-ins Welcome, and the YouTube show Weekly Dumpster Fire. Bridget, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so Bridget, Barack Obama this week called out wokeness and cancel culture, which is a classic boomer move in my books. Is it time to cancel Obama?
No, but I figured they were going to come for him eventually. I'm actually surprised he wasn't already canceled.
So what's the latest with that, Bridget? Are there any moves to cancel him? We tend to get news a little bit slower out here in Australia. What's the latest?
They did. There was an opinion piece that basically compared him to a white conservative man. So I think he has been canceled. But it seems more like a class war. You know, I think a lot of this that appears to be wokeness, or I think it's people saying like, well, of course these privileged people can say this. We're coming for your money.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad they said that they reminded of a white conservative man, because it was definitely something I kept on thinking in the 2008 primaries was like there's so many similarities between him and a white conservative man. But like one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about was your article, The Battle Cry for the Politically Homeless, which I think is still your pinned tweet on Twitter. And I thought it was such a fantastic article, and I wanted to talk to you about that. So let's start with like, who are the politically homeless?
I think that there's a large population of people who can't really get on board with the rhetoric of the current administration, the demonization, a lot of the corruption. And then they're also seeing, I always make the joke that I would be, there will come a day where something will come into the news about the current administration. And I'm like, that's it. I'm marching, I'm taking to the streets, I'm joining the resistance, and then I'll go, in my attempt to go sign up for the resistance, someone would be like, what pronouns do you go by? And I would be like, I'm out.
Exactly. So was that issue going to be the Trump dog Photoshop? The fact that he can get away with that, the fact that he can just willingly put something out like that fake news?
I feel like that's the least of the worries that we have. That's what I was saying this week on Dumpster Fire. Actually, is he's so outside norms that in order to evaluate him from an intellectually honest point of view, you have to say, and especially if you're somebody who, like myself, comes from a liberal background and was never really exposed to conservative media, what is something that this president is doing that all presidents did? What is something that's outside the norms, even for conservatives, which is where I think when you read like never Trumpers, like Tom Nichols or Jonah Goldberg or people who are lifelong conservatives, you can see where that differentiation is. And then what is the things that he's doing that are outside of the norm that are like chase the shiny thing? He's just a 12-year-old with a Twitter account. And what are some of the things that we actually need to push back against because they undermine democracy? Like, parsing all of that is very hard. And most people just don't want, it's much easier to just decide you're in a tribe. And on the left, people will say, don't both sides of this stuff. It's not even the same. And from my perspective, a lot of the authoritarian language policing and the canceling of people and publicly shaming people, that is seems to be more of a leftist phenomenon than anything. So, I feel like there's like different versions of fascist kind of, adjacent-ish encroaching on all sides. And I think most people fall in that politically homeless where they're able to see this and say, well, like that, I don't want socialism, and I don't want, but I also don't want like just this shit show that's on, I don't know if I can swear,
a little bit of swearing's okay.
Clown show that's on the right. So that kind of is what inspired the piece, is that I feel like, there's a a lot of ideologues who have the microphone. And in the middle of that are people who don't really prescribe to, they're not on board with either one of those extremes.
Bridget, clearly you're very anti-woke among other things. It's just occurred to me that as far as I know, you have never been cancelled unless I've missed something. If that's the case, how do you think you've got away with it?
Never been canceled I don't know. So I was kind of unceremoniously dumped from Playboy. Now, whether that was canceled, I don't think that I could call it that. It wasn't like publicly everyone was calling for my head. It's harder to cancel somebody like me. I think what are they going to take from me? I have my own thing. And so they could boycott my sponsors. They could boycott my being on Patreon. They could boycott me being on Twitter. But I'm not saying anything hateful, and I'm certainly not saying anything that is completely unreasonable. In many instances, I'm just speaking a pretty commonly held, if not privately held, belief that a lot of people feel like they can't say because they work at corporations or institutions or universities, or they're worried that their friends in their liberal cities will come after them or whatever. So I don't think that I'm not like some radical out there trying to start like any kind of, I don't want to fuel the culture war. If anything, I really think that people should be trying to talk more across the aisle than less.
Yeah, so you talked about how everyone's becoming quite polarized and tribalized. I remember I was watching this interview with Jonathan Haidt, and he was talking about how in the 90s, if you got someone's political beliefs on, say, gun control, it was somewhat of a predictor of how they'd feel about everything else, like healthcare and stuff. But today, it is almost clear. Once you go, a Beto O'Rourke gun control position, you're 100% going to fall into this healthcare position and this other position on this other topic. Do you reckon people are becoming more tribalized like that, and how do we stop it?
I don't know that they actually are, because from, obviously I attract a crowd that's politically homeless, and so it's self-selecting the emails and the completely anecdotal evidence that I have at my disposal. But I hear from a lot of women who ask me, why can't there be a candidate that supports my right to have guns and my right to do with my body what I will. So I don't know that. And there used to be a lot more nuance around conversations like abortion and gun control. And I just think that social media turns everything, I always call it the flattening. It flattens everything and everyone into this two-dimensional political abstraction. And then everyone starts engaging as if they're political abstractions, and it leaves very little room for nuance. Even with the abortion debate, I think most people are squishy. Most pro-lifers who are reasonable are willing to say, maybe come back, compromise. And most people who are pro-abortion are willing to say, within a certain amount of time. And that discussion just isn't even had anymore. Now it's 9 months or nothing. And I think in the middle of those discussions, and those topics, a lot of voices are getting lost because nobody is speaking for them.
All right, this might be related to a word that you've invented called Phetasy, which is you've named after yourself, I've noticed. So that's an interesting development. Now, this word, according to...
It's a long story.
That's all right. We've got a few minutes. So this on your website says, when reality becomes parody, when parody becomes reality, irony squared, the age we're living in now. So you've named this after yourself. Do you think politics and culture and all the rest of it is more ridiculous now than in the past? And explain what Phetasy means.
Okay, so first things first. Phetasy, I didn't name myself after it. What happened was I started a company named, I made up a word to describe a phenomenon, this phenomenon of reality becoming parody or parody becoming reality that I was observing like in 2002, 3, 4, 5. And then I started my company in 2005, called it Phetasy, defined the word. And then when social media came about, I didn't trust social media. So I used Bridget Phetasy since I figured I was going to try and get this word out, and it was my brand. And I just used it as my last name because I didn't want to use like my real last name publicly on these things that were brand new, which looking back was an inadvertently genius thing to do. It was not intentional. I wish I could say it was. And so the word kind of, it's like we've grown into the word. I always had a very hard time explaining it to people. It's much easier now when headlines read like parody, and I'm not sure if this is just the accelerating effect of postmodernism with technology, where everything becomes mediated, and so those lines get so blurred that it's almost inevitable that irony starts doubling back on itself and becoming literal.
Yeah, I'm completely with you about like the fall of journalism. I mean, like last week, I know I brought it up on in this interview already, but the people going after Trump because of the Photoshop of the dog with the Medal of Honor, like, how do you look at yourself in the mirror if you're a journalist and you've genuinely sent a email going, well, we need to find out where this dog Photoshop came from?
It's so crazy to me because they walk into his trap, and it's like they step on the same rink over and over and over again. And I don't know how you don't check yourself as a journalist. So how are you reporting on the president sharing a meme as if he's sharing a doctored photo and trying to undermine national security, without recognizing that you're only giving him exactly what he wants and only proving what he says about the corporate media being biased and a joke as accurate. So there's so many good journalists who work tirelessly, and it's such a thankless job, particularly local journalists, which is being destroyed. And even, there are big pieces that are, and so I hate that all journalism, which I feel is such an important profession, is being reduced to this, but they are not doing themselves any favors. Even like that headline with the terrorists that we killed.
Yeah, al-Baghdadi.
Where all the Washington Post, the Washington Post and the New York Times were like, oh, the austere scholar. They cannot. And, people joke about Trump derangement syndrome, but it is real. It is like a real thing that will be in the DSM someday.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think I like to clarify that I don't think it's just on the left. I think there are two strains of Trump derangement syndrome, and it's the resistance strain, which is everything somehow is Trump related, and these people can't think about him all day long and try to vilify him. And then there's the MAGA strain, in which he's like a God king and can do no wrong, and they cannot see anything possibly corrupt or cynical or bad about him. And I actually think the majority of people don't live in either one of those places. Unfortunately, the loudest people do live in those places, and they have that microphone, and it's destructive. And what worries me, and this is something I wrote about, I don't even think this article's up on Playboy anymore because they wiped everything, but now it seems like they're slowly putting things back up, probably because I'm talking about the articles that I wrote for them and they realize it's good for traffic. But I worry that it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy for the left, where these people, and this is what's so destructive, you would rather that he actually is Hitler so that you can be right than recognize that he's maybe just a fucking idiot and kind of ineffective and maybe isn't as bad as you think, and he is doing things that are corrupt, and those are the things we should push back against. But by chicken littling and calling him this extreme dictator, you're undermining your credibility. It's like crazy to me. That's what's so frustrating to me. How badly they want him to be this thing so that they can be right. And how can you not see that? Like how dangerous that is.
Now, Bridget, you say that you're politically disinterested, but based on that answer and based on Dumpster Fire, your weekly podcast, which is awesome and we love and everyone should check out, you do talk about politics a lot. What keeps bringing you back to politics?
I don't know. I don't feel like it's politics, though. I'm not a policy wonk. I think it's more culture. So I think that, like Breitbart said it, I think all politics happen downstream of culture. So I'm much more, I'm like intuitive about this stuff. I'm just more observing the culture and the culture war. And then I see how it plays out in politics, but I'm by no means somebody who's paying, detailed attention to all the policies. And if I were to go on some show and talk about them, I would be the idiot that I know that I am.
We do that on our show just as well. So now, Bridget, I know we're calling you at a bittersweet time for us both. Beto O'Rourke has just said he's out of the presidential race. I'm personally inconsolable. There were so many stories, there were so many speeches and Instagrams I'll never have the opportunity to laugh at because they'll never exist. What's his legacy to you?
Oh, God. That guy is so ineffective. I mean, I think I said it on Joe Rogan. I was like, he's like basal skin cell cancer. It's like it wants attention, but it's completely ineffective. I just feel like that's his legacy. It's like he's like what a day patient can't, like an outpatient cancer. Like he just doesn't. He just seems like such a little. I said it on Twitter too, that he's the guy that breaks up with you because he needs to go find himself. Like he just strikes me as such a, I don't know.
That was the best tweet. I actually roared out with laughter when I read that one. It's so true.
What is that though? What is that about him? Is it just that he's like a pussy? Like, what am I picking up on there? I just don't know. I don't know. He's one of those guys that you're like, oh, I feel like he'll be wearing a scarf any day now.
Absolutely. All right, Bridget, thank you so much for coming on the show. Make sure you're downloading Walk-Ins Welcome, the podcast, and make sure you're subscribed to Weekly Dumpster Fire. It's such an awesome show. Bridget, this was awesome.
Thank you so much, guys.